Welcome to So and So, brought to you by Bernina, made to create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with a special member of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. Our guest today is the cosplayer known as Dessu, who has been creating cosplay costumes for more than 20 years. Growing up in the mid-Atlantic region of the U.S., she started finding out about cosplay on the internet in the early 2000s and learned how to sew from her grandmother. As an artistic and creative kid, a trait strongly encouraged by her parents, cosplay became a passion and a craft she devoted herself to, along with art. Focusing now on the creative costuming aspect of cosplay, Desi concentrates on design and helping those new to this art form. Hi, Desi, and welcome to So and So.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We are going to enter the world of cosplay today, which might be something new for some of our listeners, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, you've said that your grandmother taught you how to sew. Tell us about that and what inspires you as you create.
So I grew up as an only child, so oftentimes when both my parents were at work, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and she did a lot of projects for church bazaars. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I would sit at the dining room table and just help her put together little projects. Um, one of the first projects that comes to mind is I remember helping her put together these little angels with styrofoam heads with like lace glued to them to
Sure.
create their little dresses. And as time went on with her, projects became more advanced, and eventually I was looking at her dolls and just going, how do you make doll clothes, grandma?
Uh-huh.
um so my first experience with handling fabric was sitting at her dining room table trying to hand sew these little doll dresses. At the time, I hadn't had any experience using a sewing machine yet. I didn't start using a sewing machine probably until I was about 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I must have been in elementary school was my first experience with doing anything sewing related. And as time went on, projects became more advanced as to what it was that I wanted to do with her. She actually was the first person to help me with making a cosplay costume that I wanted to wear for Halloween. Because at the time I didn't really know anything about conventions. I just knew that I loved these characters and their costumes.
Mm-hmm.
She did most of the work on it, though. I mainly just watched her make it.
So do you have any of the first things that you ever made when you were little? Any of those little dresses and things?
You know, this is one of my biggest cosplay regrets is anything that is older than like anything that's like 20 years ago, I don't have anymore, 20
Mm-hmm.
plus years ago. And that's one of my big cosplay regrets because I really wish I still had those items to look back on and just see how much I've grown and also just the memories attached to them.
Sure. Now we're talking a lot about cosplay, and we're going to get into that even more. So for our listeners who don't know about this, would you explain it and talk about why it has such a profound meaning to so many people?
So cosplay, the word is Japanese in origin, and it is costume and play put together. But cosplay doesn't have to specifically be inspired by Japanese characters. You can be dressing up as an anime character. You can be dressing up as a Western comic book character, Disney character. It's literally just I love this character so much that I want to express my love by actually dressing up as them.
And you mentioned conventions,
Mhm.
and this has really come of online in the past, since the past 20, 30 years. Talk a little bit about those meetings where people get together.
Oh gosh, they really are spaces where a lot of like-minded people can get together and just be themselves. I started going to conventions in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
And it really was a space where I felt like I was around people who were like myself. So you go to these places, and it's still like that even today. And it's people being themselves. Not everybody wears a costume, but still the connection of, I love anime or I love comics. That connection is there for people to connect and meet people or just hang out with their friends.
Mm-hmm. Now, cosplay has always been a form of self-expression for you, and you say that you found out a lot about yourself through this art form. Would you share this journey with us?
Oh, so me finding cosplay started my first anime that I loved very dearly, and I still love. I'm a huge Sailor Moon fan. And I used to follow Sailor Moon news through this website called saveoursailors.com. I think they may still have it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day going through the links on there, and I saw a link that was titled conventions. I was like, conventions? What's that?
Mm-hmm.
I click on it, and it's all cosplay coverage. So I see pictures of people in cosplay, and I didn't realize that was a thing that you could do. So that kind of was when I got bit by the cosplay bug, and I really wanted to get involved in this. And so I've always been really big into drawing, and I love character design and just looking at how characters are drawn in their costumes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just kind of evolved from there, um, with me starting with learning how to hand sew and then finally getting my first sewing machine from my parents in high school as a gift. It was a birthday gift. I actually still have it.
Mm-hmm.
Sentimentality won't let me get rid
Sure.
of it. Um, it re- it's a very complex journey of just pushing myself, continuing to find things that I love and that I'm inspired by, and just I continue to do it because it makes me happy.
Well, let's talk a little more about this because you shared that at first you were really shy about telling people in fabric stores what you were making.
Oh gosh. um, so when I started cosplaying, and I think everybody had this experience, maybe some people just didn't mind explaining they were making a costume in March.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, when we went into Joanne Fabrics, for example, when we were getting started in the earlier mid 2000s, if we would normally just say, "Oh, we're making a prom dress" or something like that, something that you would expect most people to understand what you're making. Um, but still, you definitely would get some like puzzled looks, like, "Are you sure you're making a prom dress with this interior decorating fabric?"
A very unique prom dress, right?
A very unique one. Um, it took quite so I think once cosplay started becoming more of a mainstream thing, people started to become a little bit more comfortable with saying what it is that they're making. Now when I go in stores, I tell people what I'm making because
Mm-hmm.
cosplay is now everywhere, which I think is great for people to understand what it is and for people to feel more comfortable to say, this is something that I'm passionate about that I'm working on.
Mm-hmm. It's very mainstream now. Now, you've also talked about learning persistence, looking back on the work and seeing how far you've come, and you're involved in the community and helping those new to it. And you said that you think that what you learned is an experience that everyone in the community can relate to, and that it's really empowering. Tell us more about that.
I I think it's super important for people every now and then to go back in their cosplay portfolios and look at their older projects and see where they are now. Um, I think a lot of us that have been at this for quite some time, we sometimes unexpectedly, myself included, find us in a position of we're now a resource for newer people to come to who have questions, and sometimes we take for granted the knowledge that we have, that maybe something comes more intuitively to us because of how long we've been doing it. And sometimes it's surprising, like, oh, I have this piece of knowledge that I maybe don't realize is as valuable as I think it is. I guess I'll share how I do this. Like, for example, yesterday I actually posted a video on so for like animal gajinka is the term that we like animal inspired type characters.
Mm-hmm.
The term we use is gajinka. I get a lot of questions about how I attach the ears to my wig.
Mhm.
And for me, I've just been doing it for so long, I take it for granted. It's like, oh, well, I guess I could make a video showing how I do that.
So you get asked questions that you didn't even know exist.
Hmm.
Um, and, you've said that back 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, if you wanted a cosplay costume, the resources weren't there. So cosplayers modified existing clothing, learned how to sew, and that cosplay is a mix of artistic ambition and being very personal. Um, Talk a little bit more about how this art form evolved from there to posting videos and being very open about what you're doing.
It really, really has grown a lot. When I first started, there was some purchase costumes available online, but the pickings were really slim as far as what you could get. Like if there was a specific character you had in mind, it was likely you may not be able to find who it was that you were looking for. The materials and resources also just have evolved a lot. Like when I got started, the community we all kind of were learners together. Really, the only knowledge anybody may have had was similar to my experience, or maybe you had a relative that was able to teach you how to sew. So, as time went on, there definitely were a lot more tutorials available for people to reference to understand how to make things. And also just the fabrics have evolved a lot. The wigs have gotten better in quality. Just as time went on, the quality of everything has just gone up. And even with you bring up the idea of purchasing clothing
Hmm.
to modify that still is a valid form of being able to create a costume. It's a great way for someone who is getting started to be able to get their feet wet with learning some sewing abilities and even purchasing costumes now because like I said, the quality with everything has gone up. People will purchase costumes and then modify them and get them to fit them better and fix some of the accessories because sometimes the accessories are a little shaky with the quality depending.
Hmm.
Um, that's how a lot of newer people are getting started is modifying and then being like, okay, I learned how to modify a garment. What else can I do?
Hello, Sewing Bees. It's Sue Very Pruitt from Suki Sews. You know that dream studio you have in your head with every machine, notion, and accessory you want? We've all got one, and I just designed mine at BerninaSweepstakes.com. And you can design your own too, and then win it. I just had to have space for all my machines, the ones I already owned and the ones I wanted to add to my studio. Make sure you're in to win Bernina's Dream Studio $100,000 giveaway. Design your own dream studio at BerninaSweepstakes.com. Dream it, design it, win it.
Now, if somebody doesn't sew,
Hmm.
they would look to somebody like you to help them. And these days, you say you push yourself with each of your projects and you create costume design, illustration artworks that are for others to recreate as a costume of their own.
Hmm.
Tell us about some of your personal creations and then share with us some of those you've done for others.
So with me with costume illustration, um, and my projects, with the costume illustration aspect, for me, it's a lot of times I'm either inspired by a character that I'm really attached to, and maybe I've cosplayed them multiple times and I want to find a different way to express how I really love that character. And other times maybe it's I really like this character, but I wish the aesthetic matched more of the type of costumes that I like to make. I'm actually working on a costume inspired by Jean Grey as Phoenix from X-Men right now that is in my style.
Now, your style, what is that?
I like doing things that are more soft and fanciful, elaborate,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
sparkly. I like being detailed and just kind of decadent. I'm inspired a lot by artists like Arete or Bob Mackie, um, Alphonse Mucha. I I love things that are a little bit just more fanciful.
Now, if somebody doesn't sew, but they like cosplay,
Mhm.
what do they do? How do they get costumes?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of different ways. First of all, in the cosplay community, there's a lot of very talented people that you can commission to
Hmm.
get a costume for or costume from. There's also a number of quality costumes that you can get from stores now that there's a lot of different ways.
Now, you talk about helping people new to cosplay
Mhm.
and sharing your knowledge. What advice would you give those who are new to it?
The advice I would give for those that are interested and are new to cosplay is definitely to start with something you love. Each of the projects that I work on, I try to choose things that I am passionate about. So that way I'm able to remain enthusiastic about what it is that I'm making. The other piece of advice I would give is it's really important to find friends that you can socialize with in cosplay because that's also an important component of cosplaying and enjoying yourself
Hmm.
is connecting with others who may also love the same things that you do. And it's pretty easy when we're all in cosplay to kind of deduce and figure out what it is that everybody loves.
So take us into one of the conventions. What's a typical day like there?
Oh, it really depends person by person what your interest is. I can describe what my day typically would be like
Sure.
from a cosplayer perspective. For me, definitely getting up early in the morning to get makeup on, which for me, I could, depending on the costume, getting makeup on and the costume finally on is probably about 2 hours.
Hmm.
Um, and I try to be out on the convention floor at about 10, hopefully.
Hmm.
It depends on what photo shoots I have scheduled, and oftentimes we're thinking about things like, what does the light look like? What space will be available? Um, if you're in a group, what time is everybody else willing to get up at to meet up? That's another factor that can come into play.
Hmm.
So oftentimes for me, it is the costuming aspect is the emphasis for my convention experience. So it's often scheduled photo shoots, meeting up with people, cosplaying with a group if I'm cosplaying with a group. Um, Taking a break for lunch is very important.
That
um,
is
there are
important.
times where I admit that I do forget to eat. I don't recommend that. um,
Hmm.
Make sure to take plenty of breaks in cosplay. Um, Depending on the con, like there's certain winter conventions I go to, like KatsuCon, that I do get out of costume earlier just because the light is so limited during the winter. Probably about 5, I'm no longer in costume and
Hmm.
probably off to dinner.
Now, you were talking about cosplaying with other people.
Mhm.
Explain to us what that is.
So with cosplay groups, I feel like there's that one person that normally comes forward with, oh, I saw this cool thing online. Or maybe there's like a movie or an anime about to come out. And oftentimes these groups form together pretty naturally, I feel like, with friend groups, because as people cosplay over the years, you end up finding people that you just gel with and you end up just cosplaying with pretty frequently.
Hmm.
Um, so I feel like normally there's that one person that approaches the group and everything just forms together naturally because everybody finds who it is and a cosplay idea from like a series or something inspired by. There's honestly a lot of things that cosplay groups can be inspired by. Like,
Uh-huh.
for example, Disney recently came out with these Disney designer dolls that are very haute couture inspired.
Hmm.
And there's one for, I think, nearly every single princess except for maybe the Frozen sisters.
Hmm.
So I'm making one. I just told another friend about it, and she's like, "Oh, well, I may have to join too." And we have other friends, so I know that we're probably going to end up like having some sort of little mini group formed at some point.
Sure.
Cosplay groups can form together pretty naturally that way.
Desi, you're also an artist.
Mhm.
Tell us about your art.
So my background is actually in illustration, and I've been drawing for as long as I can remember. My art is inspired by my own costume tastes. I definitely am a child of my time growing up in the 90s and being influenced by um, what the aesthetic was for manga art in the 90s, which was very flowy and lots of jewelry, just whimsical and fanciful looks, which is what I'm influenced by.
So, when you're influenced by this, are you drawing? Are you using watercolor? What mediums do you work in?
So it's actually funny you mentioned watercolor. I actually did used to work in watercolor, but I've backed away from it just because it's not the most forgiving medium.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now purely digital, and I work in Procreate on an iPad.
So, Desi, what's next for you? What's your dream?
Oh gosh. I like to think that, especially with cosplay and art, that dreams are mini dreams that lead to other dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, my dream is to just keep going and do what makes me happy. Um, while opportunities that I didn't know ever existed continue to happen as this community evolves and as the internet evolves.
So we've talked about a lot of things today. Question for you: is there anything I didn't ask that you wish I had?
Um, I don't think so. Like, talking about cosplay is such a complicated, uh, elaborate topic, especially when you're talking about a span of 20 years. So I think we covered a good amount of material as far as what my experiences have been with it.
That's great. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I want to thank you for sharing your story with us today. Now, if any of our listeners would like to reach out to you to learn more, what's the best way for them to do that?
So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at underscore Dessu.
And again, I really thank you for this. You've opened our eyes to the world of cosplay, and we'll look forward to seeing what your next creations are.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to sharing them. And thank you so much for having me today. This was a lot of fun to talk and discuss cosplay with you.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it. Another story about someone just like you, someone for whom sewing is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life and a connection to something much bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to meg@soandsopodcast.com or just complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to, review, and rate this podcast on your favorite platform, and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.